Welcome to A Guide to Every Deck in EDH. Today we're looking at Ghyrson Starn Kelermorph. This is a 3-mana Izzet commander, and it has Ward 2, and it says, whenever another source you control deals exactly 1 damage to a permanent or player, it deals 2 damage to that permanent or player. So it's not 2 damage instead of 1, it's 2 damage on top of the 1. So obviously, we're going to want a ton of cards that deal exactly 1 damage to our opponents or their permanents. And therefore, this leads to a bunch of burn. So we have burn in a number of different categories. We have cards like Agate Instigator and Impact Tremors that will trigger and deal 1 whenever a creature enters. We have cards that trigger off of casting non-creatures or specifically instants and sorcery. So these are cards like Coruscation Mage and Electrostatic Field. We have cards that just straight up deal 1 damage to everybody during their upkeep. So Copper Tablet deals 1 damage to every player during their upkeep. Roiling Vortex does the same. We've got Razorkin Needlehead, which damages our opponents during their draw step or whenever they draw a card. Hellrider, which causes 1 damage per attacker. Unstable Amulet, which deals 1 damage to opponents when we cast spells from anywhere other than our hand, and we'll get to what this does further down the list. And then we've got Scalding Viper, which is basically a one-sided Eidolon of the Great Revel, but it only does 1 damage, and it also doubles as a bounce spell. And then finally, we've got Young Pyromancer and Third Path Iconoclast. This deck is going to be playing a lot of spells that are going to trigger these guys. The 1/1s can also deal exactly 1 damage to an opponent, and the tokens trigger Agate and Impact Tremors. Now, the big thing here is obviously that Ghyrson Starn also increases the amount of damage that gets dealt to us. So things like Copper Amulet and Roiling Vortex that are symmetrical, Ghyrson also increases the damage to us. So the idea is that most of the cards will be asymmetrical and that they will only damage our opponents or our opponents' permanents. And that when we do have instances of these cards that deal damage to us, well, it doesn't matter because overall, the amount of burn that's being applied to the players is asymmetrical. Our opponents are taking more burn than we're taking. So moving on, we have a bunch of cantripping or impulse drawing cards. So we've got cards like Taxian Probe, Embrace the Unknown, Reckless Impulse, and Ren's Resolve. We're going to be playing a lot of cheap spells and a lot of cards that are going to get us mana when we cast those cheap spells, as a way to keep churning through our deck and triggering all of these things and making sure that Ghyrson Starn deals a lot of damage to our opponents. We've got our card draw. So this is the cards that either straight up draw more cards or they impulse draw for more than like 2 at a time. So whereas a card like Reckless Impulse only gets us 2 impulse draws, something like Ignite the Future or Inspired Tinkering get us 3 impulse draws. And we also have access to Jessica as well. Although Light Up the Stage doesn't exactly fall into that category either. So this may be more of like a cantrip. Then we've got a little bit of a combo here with Goblin Sharpshooter. So basically, Ghyrson Starn makes it so that Goblin Sharpshooter does 3 damage to every creature that it targets. And therefore, most creatures are probably going to die based on this. So we can machine gun down all of our opponent's creatures with this card. We also have Tetsuko Umezawa Fugitive. So we're making a bunch of 1/1 tokens off of Third Path and Young Pyro. Therefore, we want those tokens to be unblockable. And so Tetsuko is going to help us do that. We're going to have a bunch of fast mana. We obviously want to keep impulse drawing into more impulse draw, and we can't do that without getting a bunch of fast mana, so here it is. We've got our cards like Burgi, Runaway Steamkin, Stormkiln, and Urabrask that trigger off of spells, and we've got straight up just fast mana like Sticker Goblin and Seething Song and Jessica as well. We're going to run a ton of lands, way more than normal at 38, whereas I normally only play around 30 because we want to consistently hit land drops and because our ramp is not going to be as much in the deck. Since we want to just mainly keep churning through cards, and if we're impulse drawing into random mana rocks, that's not really that great. Some highlights here are things like Shivan Gorge, which is a land that can deal 1 damage to opponents. This is just another way to maybe get that final damage through, or if we just have nothing better to do. Sokenzan can create 1/1 tokens, which if they get through are also going to be multiplied to 3 damage instead of just 1. We've got some protection. We don't want our Ghyrson Starn to die or to get countered, so here's some cards that can help us prevent that. Then very, very little ramp. We already have our fast mana taken care of a lot, and this just basically is the next best bunch of ramp in Izzet colors. And then we've got a bunch of removal that gets heavily multiplied by our commander. So cards like Blazing Volley and the Festivities and Tectonic Hazard that would normally only deal 1 damage to each opponent or each opponent's creature now deal 3 as a result of Ghyrson. Finally, some Stax pieces. The fact that we don't have to rely on a lot of mana rocks means that we can play some Stax. So we've got Energy Flux, basically double a Kataki and Null Rod, and then Aura Flux similarly is Energy Flux but for enchantments instead of artifacts. So while we don't have any specific combo that actually just kills opponents on the spot, we don't have Thoracle, we don't have Dual Caster Mage, The plan is that we will eventually just burn out all opponents given enough time. And so with all that said, that does it for Ghyrson Starn Kelermorph in EDH.